Okay, we'll get started. Welcome everyone to this month's webinar from Top Step. We're happy to have you today. We're going to focus today on utilization reporting. My name is Ron Bro. And the reason we really focus on utilization is because as a service organization, it really is the key metric that just about every service organization cares about, measures, and in some places bonus-based stuff. So it's important that we focus on making sure we get it right with utilization reporting, and hopefully today you'll learn something to help you improve your ability to do utilization reporting. So all of you know OpenAir has a lot of ways to do reporting of different types of KPIs, and so obviously utilization is one of them. So built into the system, there is a series of standard equations that you can pull into reports and calculate utilization. I would say that generally this doesn't work for the majority of organizations that we work with, but it is a good place to start and then determining if it works or doesn't work. But when it doesn't work, OpenAir gives you that additional ability to do custom calculations. And this is generally what we see customers really focusing in on to be able to get that utilization reporting. We see a lot of customers that might be downloading multiple reports out of OpenAir and then cobbling those together to come up with utilization reports. And generally we tell customers there's not a utilization calculation we haven't run across that we can't get a one-click report in OpenAir with a level of accuracy that is needed. So we'll talk about some of those tips and tricks in the next few slides. Obviously, what is utilization? It's a denominator, which is usually an expected work hours of availability based on the user or a team of users. And then obviously from a numerator is what types of hours are we including when we calculate the percentage. So we can have billable, or you can expand that utilization categories beyond just single utilization category. So we'll talk about some of the use cases we run into using these different options. So focusing on the denominator, this is always where we start with customers is, all right, what is the denominator of your utilization requirement? And then from there, there are standard options in OpenAir for measuring utilization, coming up with a denominator. The ones we see most common are work schedule hours and base work schedule hours. The work schedule is obviously set up by the administrator. It includes how many expected hours a resource is expected to work each day or per week. And then within those work schedule hours, you can embed corporate holidays, so days that the company provides and no work is expected on those days. And so the benefit of those work schedules is you can have multiple work schedules within an organization, especially if you're a global organization. You could have different work hours per week. You could have different holidays, obviously, per year. So it's not unexpected to have multiple work schedules. But the difference between the work schedule and a base work schedule is the work schedule will include the holidays. So as an example, if the 4th of July falls on a Monday, if you use the work schedule hours for that week, the denominator would be 32 hours. If you're using the base work schedule, the denominator would be 40 hours. So first thing we kind of determine is which of those values is most appropriate for our company and for our customers. And then we decide if we need to go further down the line. And you can use work schedule hours looking forward, which is really helpful, as well as looking back. When you are looking backwards, you may want to start with a work schedule, and then you may want to delineate even further from there. So, for example, you may want to say, we want to include the work schedule, but we also want to subtract PTO. So any time in the, a timesheet is entered on PTO, we want to remove those hours as well. So if I took an extra day the week of 4th of July to recover from my fireworks, then, my 32-hour work schedule minus my 8-hour PTO would then equate to a 24-hour denominator for me. And You can do the same with base work schedule hours as well. And then by using tags inside of OpenAir, you can bundle up PTO hours or other types of hours. Generally, we see that using either a task type, kind of on the task, using that to stamp hours with a specific category, so that you can then use those to remove hours or add hours. This is an advanced report. It's a good place to start if you are new to OpenAir and you're trying to come up with a utilization. It's under advanced reports, called historical utilization, and it gives you pretty much one-click clickable configuration to coming up with a utilization report. So we see a small amount of customers that maybe start here, and then they end up creating more customized utilization reports. But this is a good place to start if you are struggling to get utilization reports. So non-standard values. So, we see a lot of customers that will use 2080 as their utilization denominator. So irrespective of any sort of holidays, or irrespective of, we want quarterly 520 is what we're going to use, and we want to use that. And so in that scenario, you can create a custom calculation that creates basically a constant of 520 or 2080, depending on what you're reporting on. And you can then do that to include that in your reports, in your custom calcs. So if you create a 520 and you take the quarterly hours, divide by 520, you'll get a quarterly utilization based on those hard-coded hours. Now, the downside of these is they're not very dynamic. So if you create a quarterly calculation, then you have to be reporting on quarterly time to get any sort of a reasonable output. Because if you did it on a single month, you're going to have 520 constant in the calculation. Obviously, that's not going to give you what you want. So be careful when using these hard-coded hours. You may have to have different versions of the hard-coded hours if you're looking to get different period-based calculations. But this is something we've seen from customers where they do have just a hard-coded amount that's not tied specifically to work schedules or base work schedules that they want to use to come up with the utilization. So it is an option. It's just a little more rigid and has a little bit less flexibility. More commonly, we see custom calc used for non-standard values. So you can have different components that impact what hours go into the denominator. So generally, we would start with a work schedule or base work schedule hours. Then you can remove different time categories, as I mentioned earlier, PTO, vacation, as such. And again, using task types, you can then have those hours. You can create a custom calc for those hours and then remove them from your work schedule or base work schedule. And so those are pretty common, and probably I would say most used when coming up with custom denominators for customers. And you don't have to have a single denominator. You may have varied denominator for various calculations. And so obviously you can have that various denominators and then create those utilization calcs based on those various denominators and have those display in reports. When you're doing a calculation using a denominator, let's say our denominator is 40 hours and you run a report for a week and someone worked 30 hours, so they came up with a 70% utilization. The question then becomes well, is 70% good? Is 70% bad? So we're going to talk about how do you quantize not only how you get the calculation, but how can you make sense of the numbers you're seeing. But before we go there, let's talk about the numerator. So again, lots of varying options with numerator. If you're depending on a lot of it, if you're looking forward or if you're looking backwards. If you're looking forward, typically it's based on either booked hours or assigned hours. And so, using booked hours, you can schedule, resources through the resource module. booking them time into the future. You can then project what kind of utilization at an individual, at a group, by a job code, into the future using those booked hours over your denominator. So this can be really handled. You can do booked with actuals. So you have, in a current week, we're using actuals plus booked. In past weeks, you're using actuals. In future months, weeks or months, you'd be using booked. So you can vary different calculations for being able to look forward. Inside assigned hours, same concept. You can use assigned hours into the future as well, assigned with actuals. I'd say probably for the most part, when we're looking at future utilization, most commonly we see bookings as the numerator driving. You can categorize your bookings by like confirmed bookings or different booking types. You can omit or include in the calculation as you look forward. Looking back, we generally always see we're looking backwards. You're looking at really timesheet data based on what the resource entered, and you can then filter from there to see what time gets included or what time gets excluded from those numerators. And that's generally within a report or within a custom calculation. And generally we see within a custom calc the filtering happen. And that gives you the ability to, if you have multiple flavors of utilization, you could have those, you might say billable utilization is important, but they also want to include productive utilization. Well, what is productive utilization? Well, what if we give in credit for pre-sales support, credit for mentoring, credit for training? And we want to include those hours in a calculation. But I want to see the billable utilization in the same report. I see the productive utilization. And by using custom calcs and the filtering within the calculation, you can then display those side by side in an OpenAir report. Again, leveraging filters within the calculation, task type and time type factor in here. Task type, whereas you're setting at a task level what category the time gets coded to when it gets entered and approved. Time type, another option where you're selecting, having the end user select what type of time are they entering when they're entering their timesheet. So we see like billable, non-billable is a classic time type option where the user is determining whether the time is billable or non-billable based on their entering their time. And then from there, you can then filter all your billable time together, all your non-billable time for reporting purposes as well. You can then create those ratios. So you create the numerator, create the denominator, then you create those project-based fields and set those up as ratios. Again, some of the things we see from different types of utilization is billable, productive, travel. When people were once traveling, what percentage of time were people spend traveling as well. So those are some of the categorizations we see. Speaking earlier, I mentioned, well, I worked 30 hours of a 40-hour week, and I was roughly 5% utilized. Is it good? And that's another thing that customers struggle with. It's like, okay, well, I'm expecting Ron to be 50% utilized, but I'm expecting, John Doe to be 75 utilized based on their different roles in the organization. So not everyone should have or does normally have the same targeted utilization. Ron could have much more, sales time he spends doing sales work, and also people might start, they may start where they first get hired, they're expected to be 50%, and then as they get more and more experience, their utilization goals could rise, and that's really where the target utilization feature is really helpful. This allows you to basically put a percentage. Generally, we see this used for billable utilization. Because everyone has a billable utilization. It does not have to be billable utilization, but whatever, you can only have one target utilization. So you have to determine if you are measuring multiple utilization flavors, what of those do you want to use the target utilization? Again, most commonly it's billable. So this does allow you to basically say, Ron is a 50% target, John Doe is a 75% target. And then what it does is you can use it a couple of different ways. You can have it, when you turn on target utilization, it will create some new reportable values in your reporting and in your custom calculations. and it turns on target hours and base target hours. And think of those very similar to work schedule hours and base work schedule hours, except it applies the utilization target to those. So target hours would be, I'm expected to work 40 hours a week. Let's say I have my holiday and I've got 32 and I'm expected to be billable 50%. It's going to use 16 hours as the denominator for for that particular week. And if I use base, it's just going to exclude the holiday. It would take the 40 divided by 0.5 and it would give me a 20-hour numerator. Again, so for me, for 50%, my denominator, would be different than a 75% target. But when you compare us to each other, we're using that utilization target. We're both expected to be 100% against our target. So if I hit 20 hours billable over 20 hours expected in a week, I'm 100%. If John Doe hits, 30 hours billable, 75% target, he's 100%. So it allows us to really compare apples to apples when running reports to say everybody should be hovering around 100% if they met their target. And if they didn't meet their target, then we can kind of see where they're off in the reports. And so that's really the beauty of being able to use a target utilization. And it does allow you to stair-step utilization. So you could start off at one target, and then over time, target may increase or decrease. And it is date stamped as well. So that's could be helpful for new folks coming onto the team that you want to ease into the utilization calculations. It also allows you to do really, create these utilization dashboards using those targets, and allows people to create self-utilization dashboards. So if my target is 75, I can quickly run a report and say, how am I doing? What percentage of my target am I? And allows me a quick view of how am I doing against my utilization targets. The other thing I've seen used with this target utilization feature is you can just display it in a report. So if you don't use the target hours or the base target hours as part of your denominator, you can say, okay, well, Ron Bro was 50% utilized, and I can see in this report, his target utilization is 50%, so I can see the 50% is good. Or we can do even a calculation to say what's the target minus the actuals and see what the delta is. So you can use it a few different ways inside of reports in OpenAir. So once you have all this data, right, you want to be able to see the data, use the data. So what we see a lot of is we can look at this by different groupings. So, it's a bottom-up calculation. Users have utilization. Users belong to groups or departments. And so you can then roll all that up into different groupings and departments, cost centers, et cetera. You can look at trending from a utilization perspective across the entire org. How are we doing? How are we doing this time? Last year, or month over month. So we can see these type of trending reports, and also look at for teams and employees. This is where our high utilization employees within a team and our lower utilization as well. So all this, once you have this calc, a lot of ways to make it visible, to use it, and really put it all together for your organization. Utilization, we often think of looking backwards, but looking forward is almost as critical as we talked about earlier. And here you can use generally custom calculations to be able to create those future view utilization reports. So for example, Ed Ellis is booked for 116 hours in the month of May. If we take his utilization, that equates to 92% utilized for the month of May. And so here we can kind of quickly see what does our future utilization look like. This is at an employee level. Which can be very helpful to see who maybe has availability coming up, who's overscheduled upcoming, and who's underscheduled. When you're looking at future over under scheduled, really what you're start to talk about is capacity. What is our capacity in the future? for delivering services. And so in order to calculate capacity, you can use hours, as we looked at earlier, combination of bookings and potentially target utilization to say, if our organization is expected to be 50% billable, what does that equate to hours that we're capable of delivering as an organization, and how are we doing against that future view? If we add more people, what does that do to our capacity from an hours perspective? You can also look at FTEs. And this FTEs can be by named resources, but you can also look at it by job code. So for example, how many project manager FTEs do we have booked next month? And how many FTEs of work do we have coming in? And are we going to need to hire? Are we going to need to shift some projects around? And those are some really powerful metrics that can help you make some really important decisions around, are we in a good position to take on more work? Do we need to hire? And by using job codes are kind of core to both generic resources and named resources. And so you can then roll up everything at a job code level, so you can use both named and generics and be able to roll that up to be able to do that FTE analysis. Entity tags are a really critical piece to this as well. We always recommend entity tags for utilization. And the benefit of entity tags is twofold. One, being able to categorize a user, whether they're an employee or a subcontractor. And a lot of times we'll see where a user will go from an employee to a subcontractor or vice versa. And there's a date that event happened that we want to have consideration for in our reports. So being able to say, as effective January 1st, Ron Bro was an employee. Prior to that, 6 months prior to that, Ron Bro was a subcontractor. And then from there, you can run year-over-year reports, and you can exclude subcontractors or include, and be able to have those key date events respected in the report. Also, I see this a lot where not everyone starts the beginning of a month. So you may have a start mid-month for an employee. And so you can't if you use the base work schedule or the standard work schedule, it's going to do 40-hour for the whole month, 40-hour week, and that's going to, it's going to hurt your utilization calc. So being able to use entity tags to denote when someone started as an employee and when they ended, and then have the denominators of the utilization calculation using those key elements to be able to give you accurate utilization is really important. Well, we have hours, we have FTEs. What does that mean? Well, for a capacity perspective, you could use bill rates, either by job code, perhaps. You could have a standard bill rate set on each user. And then when we do that, we can come up with, okay, what is our capacity for services delivery in a given period? So if everyone meets their utilization targets, what is the dollars that we should be delivering for the organization for a particular period of time? And then that's another really powerful KPI to say, okay, we delivered X amount of dollars, our capacity is Y amount of dollars, or we see in our pipeline, we've got X amount of dollars, and versus what our capacity is to deliver that. Again, another way to think about your ability to deliver, instead of thinking it as an hours or an FTE perspective, you can think of it as a dollars perspective. Being able to do capacity planning by job code, by department, by full part-time. So these are all categories you can create in OpenAir and be able to look at those. You can see based on our target hours, our standard rates, we can say what's our capacity for revenue for different groupings, different organizations, departments, even down to the user level as well. You can also see that, future-based trending as well. On our capacity for revenue. So again, once you put all the data in OpenAir and being able to now what? This is the now what. You get these really nice one-click reports and dashboards using that data. And again, this gets into capacity planning using entity tags and job codes for generic end users, and being able to look at FTE for the past, FTE for the future. So, for Top Step, we say we need 3.63 FTEs in October, 3 in November. And you can actually show what do you have on staff. OpenAir knows how many active users you have. They know which job codes. So not only can you predict, what do you have on staff, but also what is your upcoming use case. So now you can say, okay, what is the difference? Where's the deltas between what we have on staff and then what we have upcoming work for, and be able to identify any gaps and be proactive with your, managing your customers' expectations or your hiring process. So again, this gets into using the same approach with FTEs, but using with bookings. So being able to see from a bookings perspective across, the job codes, how many booked hours we have as versus how many booked with actuals we have, and being able to manage it. So those are just some different reporting values for looking upcoming demand by job codes as well. So in summary, utilization is extremely flexible, extremely configurable. Haven't run across a scenario yet where we couldn't help a customer get a nice one-click utilization report right out of OpenAir without having to manipulate the data inside a spreadsheet. There are standard features for lots of metrics, as well as obviously, custom calculations, which are standard features that you just customize your output of your reports. If you're doing it right, you can get capacity planning in OpenAir. You can look into the future. You can see your demand, your capacity for delivering. And we'll have we actually have webinars coming up at the end of this year that are focused on demand planning and capacity planning. Those could be their own, those will be their own subjects coming up. And then we just need to understand what do we want to report on, what are we driving, what feature use do we need, what customizations do we need in the system, and so how do we make sure that what we're doing supports the business, supports the output, and helps people have the knowledge they need to do their job. So again, thank you for joining this month. Hope you picked up a tip or two today. Thank you for being a Top Step loyal fan. We are here to support all things OpenAir and have been for almost 15 years now. If you have any questions, feel free to go to our website, where we'll be posting this webinar on our website in the coming week, as well as we have webinars going back many, many years all on our website, as well as other collateral. Or if you need to contact us, there's multiple ways to reach us via our website or some of these other options. So again, thank you.